In his first public speaking of the new year today, the President of the United States revealed that the 27 psychiatrists and mental health professionals who co-authored the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, are right. That Donald Trump's condition is obviously getting worse. Now, all of us in middle age and above find ourselves spending more and more time looking for our keys. There's some neurological decline is absolutely inevitable over time. Can't escape it. But Donald Trump's is dramatic. If you thought that his pathological lying could not become more pathological or that he could not become more delusional, you were wrong, and the mental health professionals who told us he would are right. Here is a sample of President Trump's 2019 mental process.
When they say I'm not popular in Europe, I shouldn't be popular in Europe. I don't care about Europe. I'm not elected by Europeans.
You got that? He's not elected by Europeans, so he's now self-aware enough to realize that he's not popular in Europe. Or is he? Because then he said this.
I could be the most popular person in Europe. I could run for any office if I wanted to, but I don't want to.
And there you have the first president of the United States who felt it necessary to say, I don't want to run for office in Europe. But of course, also said that he could, if he wanted to. Those statements came when the president was talking to reporters in the cabinet room with a new acting Secretary of Defense sitting right beside him. And the new acting Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, had to sit there and listen to the pathological liar beside him say that the reason we now have an acting Secretary of Defense is that Donald Trump fired Defense Secretary James Mattis, something the world knows is a lie. In fact, General Mattis shocked Donald Trump with a public resignation letter that took Donald Trump several days to figure out was actually an attack on him. Donald Trump's first encounter with the American military involved what most men his age in 1968 were trying to do, and that is avoid military service in combat in the Vietnam War. Last week, the day after Christmas, the New York Times revealed that the foot doctor who provided Donald Trump with the written excuse of bone spurs to get out of military service told his daughter that he did that as a favor for Donald Trump's father, who was then the doctor's landlord. Now that Donald Trump has spent some time around generals, including his former defense secretary, retired Marine General James Mattis, who he now condemns as incompetent, Donald Trump thinks that he could have gone all the way to the top in the American military. And today, he actually said this.
I think I would have been a good general, but who knows?
Who knows? I know. We all know. Everyone in that room today with the president knows. The world knows that Donald Trump would not have been a good general and could probably have never made it through basic training. Trump supporters know that. Even they know that. And so the president's delusion is getting worse, much worse. Or at least his willingness to publicly display his delusion is getting even worse now as he ages and as we enter a new year. The congressional leadership, including Democrats and Republicans, who went to the White House today to discuss a solution to the partial shutdown of the government that Donald Trump forced when he flip-flopped and violated his own agreement to sign a bill that was passed unanimously by the United States Senate. Before that, delegation of Democrats and Republicans, including Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, went to the White House today. A New York Times profile of former Democratic leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, quoted Senator Reid saying this about Donald Trump, quote, "You can't legislate when you have a chief executive who's weird, for lack of a better description." Harry Reid is right, of course. And so after that weird meeting with the weird chief executive that was weirdly held for no reason at all in the Situation Room, everyone agreed to only one thing, and that was that nothing was accomplished by that meeting. But tonight there is yet another comment for the psychiatrists studying Donald Trump to consider a comment that has leaked from that meeting. NBC News is reporting that Senator Chuck Schumer repeatedly asked the president why he would not support passing 6 spending bills that both parties have already agreed to that would reopen government departments and agencies that have no jurisdiction over the border wall that Donald Trump wants to fund. Donald Trump eventually answered saying, "I would look foolish if I did that." Now consider the enormity of the delusion in that statement. First of all, Donald Trump thinks that if he did something rational, like sign spending bills for everything that the Democrats and Republicans already agree on, he would look foolish. But it also means that he does not think that he already looks foolish. He looks foolish to most Americans. He has looked foolish to most Americans every day of his political career, which is why he didn't win as many votes as Hillary Clinton. And if we were to analyze this comment about looking foolish just within the framework of the government shutdown, just within the couple of weeks framework of that, it would mean that Donald Trump does not believe that he looked foolish when he said this 3 weeks ago.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And I am proud, and I'll tell you what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck. I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
Joining our discussion now, Jennifer Palmieri, former White House communications director for President Obama, former communications director for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Also with us, Adam Jentleson, former deputy chief of staff to Senator Harry Reid. He's currently the director of public affairs for Democracy Forward, and Francesca Chambers, the White House correspondent for the Daily Mail. And Jennifer Palmieri, you've worked in a White House. We have never seen anything like what we're seeing in this White House, and that decision today to have a legislative meeting about the budget in the Situation Room was obviously a stunt at the Republican White House. And it makes me wonder, at what point do the Democrats say, we aren't going to participate in White House stunts? If you want to have real White House meetings, we'll attend those.
Right. I mean, I think that in the first meeting of the year, when you're the incoming speaker and the Senate minority leader, in the case of Pelosi and Schumer, and the President of the United States asks for you to come to meeting in the White House, you need to go. I thought that it was in the Situation Room, probably for an obvious reason being to make it seem as if national security is at stake with the wall, which of course it's not. The other could be very clever staff work, which is even at a Trump White House, you're not going to let the press send their cameras into the Situation Room. And perhaps a staff person wisely thought the White House end that not allowing cameras in is it was going to end up being better for the president, and Situation Room is a place to do that.
Oh, I think that's a great point, Jennifer. I didn't think of that the White House staffers not wanting a rerun of that Schumer-Pelosi confrontation with Donald Trump on video, picked a room where there could be no video. But Adam Jentleson, earlier in the day in the cabinet room, we saw the president in new flights of delusion and pathological lying about everything from his imagined firing of James Mattis to he could have been a great general himself.
Yeah, you know, what feels scary about this shutdown, which has massive effects across the country, not just for people who work for the government, but people who rely on the government for many different types of services, is that, you know, when we went through the previous longest shutdown in 2013, we were going through it, but you at least had the feeling that the players involved were responding to rational inputs. If Republicans had a really bad day of press stories, we on the Democratic side knew that that would weaken their resolve and make them more likely to compromise. What's really scary about this shutdown is it doesn't feel like Trump is responding to rational inputs. And it makes you wonder how long this could actually go on.
Yeah, and Francesca, that goes to the Harry Reid comment of you can't negotiate with someone who is this weird. And Harry Reid had a lot more to say than that in this New York Times profile. I'm just going to read some of it here. Harry Reid said about Trump, he is not immoral, but is amoral. Amoral is when you shoot someone in the head, it doesn't make a difference, no conscience. Harry Reid then went on to say, I think he is, without question, the worst president we've ever had. And Francesca, that comes out today, and it's not really a controversial report, and there isn't really any kind of counter-argument being pushed anywhere by Republicans that Donald Trump is not the worst president we've ever had.
Well, Republicans were a little bit busy today with Mitt Romney's comments. Lots of big news today, including the government shutdown and responding to Jen's comments. I do think there's something to the fact of having it in an area where reporters absolutely couldn't be allowed in, and the president couldn't say at the last minute, you know what, let's bring them on in here, because that happens quite often at the White House, where it's something that's supposed to be, quote unquote, closed press, and then the president decides to bring reporters in at the last minute. The original meeting with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi wasn't supposed to have reporters in it either, and then we all saw how that turned out. So by having it in the Situation Room, they could say that they're getting a very important border security, national security update, but it also kept reporters out of the room. And
Adam, I want to get your reaction of your former boss Harry Reid about what he had to say about the president today.
Well, I thought it was classic Senator Reid. He's always had a way with words. It was a way with words that kept those of us on his press staff on our toes frequently. But you know, the thing about it was he said what he meant, and he meant what he said, and you never had to guess where he was coming from. And I think that came through in this interview. I think he made himself very clear about how he feels about President Trump. And I think most Americans would agree with him.
We're going to go back into the cabinet room to take one more look at what the president had to say there today. And this is where he found himself basically publicly negotiating with himself a little bit over how much money he'd be able to settle for involving his wall if he could get any out of the Democrats in Congress. Let's listen to this, where he doesn't rule out accepting less than the $5 billion he's allegedly demanding. Let's listen to this.
Is there a number below $5 billion that you might be willing to accept in order to reopen the government and get this thing moving forward?
Well, I'd rather not say it. Could we do it for a little bit less? It's so insignificant compared to what we're talking about.
All right, now let's just compare that TV negotiating style with Nancy Pelosi's TV negotiating style with Savannah Guthrie. Let's watch this.
Are you willing to come up and give him some of this money for the wall? Because apparently that's the sticking point.
No, nothing for the wall. We're talking about border security.
Nothing for the wall, but that means it's a non-starter.
Well, we can go through this all, back and forth. No. How many more times can we say no? Nothing for the wall.
Jennifer, very different style between those two.
Yeah, she's probably the most effective negotiator and legislator that we've seen in Congress in a generation. And I think that, she's in a difficult position. She's the Speaker of the House. She's trying to negotiate with a president that's not particularly competent and a bad negotiator and untrustworthy. So I think, that she has to have a position that you can stick with. And I think she's come up with it. She and Schumer both come up with a very reasonable one. Let's pass what we can pass now. Hold Homeland Security back, that one appropriations bill back for a few weeks, and come to agreement on that. But let's proceed with funding what we can. I think sometimes you try to game out behind both sort of signaling to the press where you're going, but also working behind the scenes to lay out where you want a negotiation to actually end up. But you can't really do that with this president because he's not someone you can negotiate with, and he's not trustworthy. So I think you have to stick with a most responsible governing position that you can, which she has come up with, understanding that this House just got elected with a lot of people not supporting President Trump and not supporting the wall, and hope that you can bring the Senate along with you and give the president something that he's forced to sign.
Francesca, are there any signals at all in the White House about where they might be willing to go or where this is going to end up?
This is a little bit like the dog chasing its tail at this point, Lawrence, because we keep having the same conversation over and over again and going in circles on what it is that the president would want, what he would be willing to accept. And then today, GOP leaders came out of that Situation Room briefing saying that the president wants to see everyone back at the White House on Friday. And they said that that was because he seems to believe that there will be some movement on this issue after the leadership elections tomorrow. And it's not really clear what makes him believe that Nancy Pelosi would change her mind about this once she's elected speaker and be willing to give him the funding for the border wall, and why he seems to believe that there would be a solution to this on Friday. And I think you need to look to Mitch McConnell's comments today when he said that it could be days and even referred to weeks before there's a solution to this. So this shutdown could be lasting quite a bit longer.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell, who promised there would not be a shutdown even after the president threatened one, it seems to be just stepping out of this. Francesca Chambers, thank you for joining us. Jennifer Palmieri, Adam Jensen, thank you for starting us off. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.